The sun beat down on the parched earth of Redemption Creek, a relentless hammer, forging the land into a landscape of baked clay and stubborn scrub. Elias Thorne, his face a roadmap of sun-etched lines and a perpetual squint, surveyed his domain. It wasn't much, this patch of Wyoming he called home, a modest ranch, a sturdy if weather-beaten cabin, and a herd of cattle that seemed as tough and resilient as the land itself. He was a man of few words, his life a quiet rhythm of hard work and solitary evenings, but lately a different kind of quiet had settled over him, one born of loneliness. His mother, his only family, had passed 2 winters ago, and the silence in his cabin had grown heavier with each passing season. He needed a wife, a partner, someone to share the vast emptiness. He'd placed an advertisement, a simple plea for a woman willing to build a life with him, expecting a sensible, hard-working soul to answer. He hadn't bargained for the kind of response that arrived. A stagecoach, kicking up a plume of dust that mirrored the resentment in Elias's gut, rumbled into Redemption Creek. Out stepped a woman who was anything but the picture of a meek rancher's bride. Her name, the telegram had stated, was Miss Clara Sterling. Her crimson traveling dress, though travel-stained, spoke of a world far removed from the grit and grime of his ranch. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, surveyed the dusty street with an air of assessment that bordered on disdain. This was not the woman he had envisioned. This was the sheriff's daughter, and Sheriff Brody Sterling was a man Elias had more than his share of run-ins with, mostly concerning livestock and land disputes. Clara clutched her small valise, her gaze sweeping over the primitive surroundings. Her father, Sheriff Sterling, had insisted she come here to this remote outpost for her own safety. A dangerous man, a notorious outlaw known as Silas the Serpent Blackwood, had been making his way through the territories, leaving a trail of fear and destruction. And for reasons she couldn't quite fathom, her father believed Elias Thorne's ranch, isolated and seemingly remote, was the safest place for her to lie low. Elias Thorne. The name conjured images of a stern, taciturn man, a hermit of sorts, known for his formidable temper and his solitary ways, not exactly the welcoming committee she'd hoped for. As Elias approached, his spurs jingling a rough melody on the wooden boardwalk, Clara braced herself. She'd been expecting a grizzled old prospector, or perhaps a stoic farmer. Elias Thorne was younger than she'd imagined, and far more imposing. His shoulders were broad, his frame solid, built for hard labor. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, met hers with an unnerving intensity. There was no warmth there, only a grim assessment. "Miss Sterling?" Elias's voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "Mr. Thorne," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the tremor of unease. "Your advertisement brought me here." Elias grunted, his gaze flicking over her expensive dress, then back to her face. "My advertisement was for a bride, Miss Sterling. Not this." He gestured vaguely at her attire, the unspoken implication clear. She was entirely unsuited for ranch life. A flush crept up Clara's neck. "My father believes this is the safest place for me, Mr. Thorne, and I assure you I am capable of adapting." Her chin lifted, a silent challenge. She wasn't some wilting flower to be tucked away. Elias let out a short, humorless laugh. Adapting to what? To dust? To hardship? To a man who's more comfortable with cattle than conversation? He turned, a gruff invitation in his movement. "My cabin's this way. Don't expect any parlor tricks." Clara followed, her heels clicking on the boardwalk, a sharp, out-of-place sound in the quiet town. She could feel the eyes of the few townsfolk on her, their curious gazes a heavy weight. Redemption Creek was a far cry from the polite society she'd known. It was a place where survival was paramount, and appearances meant little. And Clara, daughter of the law, accustomed to a life of order and refinement, felt utterly out of her element. Elias Thorne, she suspected, was going to be a trial, and she, Clara Sterling, was about to find out just how much she could endure. The Thorn cabin was as stark and unadorned as Elias himself. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a cot that served as Elias's bed, and a small stone fireplace dominated the single room. A faint smell of wood smoke and dried herbs hung in the air. It was clean, functional, and utterly devoid of any feminine touch. Clara's valise, small as it was, seemed an intruder, an alien object in this Spartan existence. Elias gestured towards the cot. "That's yours. Ain't much, but it's dry, and it's got a roof." He didn't offer to help with her bag. His gaze remained fixed on her, as if expecting her to bolt at any moment. Clara set her valise down, her shoulders straightening. "Thank you, Mr. Thorn. I can make do." She didn't flinch. She'd seen worse accommodations during her travels with her father. This was merely different. "Clara," Elias corrected, his tone flat. "If you're going to be here, call me Elias." He turned to the fireplace, beginning to stoke the embers. "You'll need to learn a few things if you intend to stay. We eat when there's food. We work when there's work to be done, and we don't ask foolish questions." Clara watched him, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "And what if I have sensible questions, Elias?" He glanced over his shoulder, a faint frown creasing his brow. "Depends on the question." He added a log to the fire, the flames licking upwards. "Fetch some water from the well, if you can manage. Supper's almost ready. It's beans and salt pork. Hope you ain't too finicky." The well was a good 20 yards from the cabin, a rough wooden structure with a crank. Clara approached it cautiously. The bucket was heavy, the rope coarse. It took a considerable effort to lower it, and even more to draw it up, water sloshing over the sides. She returned, panting slightly, to find Elias placing 2 chipped enamel plates on the table. "See? You managed," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "That's progress." The beans were plain, the pork salty and tough, but Clara ate with a quiet determination. She refused to show weakness. She could feel Elias's eyes on her, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He was a man of observation, she realized, a man who noticed everything. Later, as she lay on the cot, the rough wool blanket scratchy against her skin, Clara stared up at the dark rafters. The silence of the cabin was profound, broken only by the crackling fire and Elias's steady breathing from his cot. She was miles from home, a stranger in a strange land, sharing a cabin with a man who seemed to regard her presence as an inconvenience. Her father's reasoning for sending her here, for her safety, felt abstract, a distant threat compared to the immediate palpable discomfort of her situation. She thought of Silas Blackwood, the outlaw her father feared, a man whose name was whispered in hushed tones, a phantom of violence and cruelty. Her father had said Blackwood was heading west, and that Elias Thorne's isolated ranch was the last known outpost in a region he was known to frequent. It was a flimsy shield, Clara suspected, against a man like Blackwood, but here she was nonetheless. Elias Thorne was a puzzle. He was gruff, uncommunicative, and seemed determined to make her feel unwelcome. Yet he had provided her with shelter, with food, and he had not turned her away. He had fulfilled the terms of his advertisement, however reluctantly, and in the vast, untamed West, that was a form of honor, she supposed. But as the night deepened, Clara knew that her peace, like Elias's, had been well and truly stolen. This was not the quiet refuge she had envisioned. This was a battle of wills, a slow, simmering conflict that had only just begun. The days settled into a grueling rhythm. Elias rose before dawn, a silent shadow moving about the cabin. Clara would wake to the smell of coffee, strong and black, and the clatter of Elias preparing to head out to the fields or the herd. She learned to manage the chores he deemed suitable for her, fetching water, tending to the small garden patch behind the cabin, mending worn clothes and keeping the cabin as tidy as possible. It was arduous work, her hands quickly becoming calloused, her muscles aching with a new and unfamiliar soreness. Elias remained a man of few words, but his silence no longer felt like outright rejection. It was more of a comfortable, if taciturn, coexistence. He would watch her sometimes, his expression unreadable as she struggled with a task, but he rarely offered help, preferring to let her find her own way. There were moments, however, when a flicker of something akin to concern would cross his face, usually when she was out of his sight for too long, or when the weather turned particularly harsh. One sweltering afternoon, as Clara was hanging laundry on the line, a rider appeared on the horizon, a solitary figure against the vast expanse of blue. Elias, who had been mending a fence nearby, straightened, his hand instinctively going to the worn leather holster at his hip. His eyes narrowed, his posture becoming tense. The rider drew closer, revealing a man Elias didn't recognize. He was lean and wiry, his face obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted near the cabin, his movements quick and economical. "Thorn," the man rasped, his voice dry and rough. "Heard you might be taking in company." His gaze swept over Clara, lingering for a moment, a predatory glint in his eyes. Elias stepped forward, placing himself between the stranger and Clara. "Who's asking?" His voice was low, a warning. "Name's Jed, just passing through, looking for work or whatever's available." Jed's eyes, when they met Elias's, were hard and assessing. "Ain't any work to be had, Jed," Elias said, his tone final. "Best be moving on." Jed's lips curved into a thin smile. "Heard rumors about some trouble brewing. Outlaws on the move. Sheriff's daughter hiding out, they say." He gestured with his chin towards Clara. "Is that so, Thorn?" Clara's heart pounded. She hadn't realized her presence was so widely known, or that Elias's ranch was considered a haven. Elias's jaw tightened. "Rumors are just that, Jed. This is my place, private business." He took a step closer to the stranger. "Now, I said you best be moving on." Jed didn't flinch. He seemed to relish the tension. "Just curious, Thorn. Folks get nervous when they hear about Silas Blackwood. Heard he's been seen making his way this direction. Mighty dangerous man, Blackwood." The name hung in the air, a tangible threat. Clara felt a chill despite the heat. Elias's knuckles were white as he gripped the brim of his hat. "I can handle my own business, Jed," Elias said, his voice dangerously soft. "You worry about yours." Jed let out a low whistle. "All right, Thorn, keep your secrets." He mounted his horse, a grudging respect perhaps in his gaze. "Just remember, the desert's a lonely place, and sometimes a man needs more than just himself to face what's coming." He rode off, leaving Elias and Clara in a strained silence. Elias watched the rider disappear over the horizon, his gaze still sharp. He turned to Clara, his expression grim. "Don't you wander too far from the cabin, understand?" "Why?" Clara asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Who was that man?" "Nobody you need to worry about," Elias said, his gaze not meeting hers. "Just a drifter. But Blackwood, he's real. And if he's in the territory, we need to be careful. Real careful." The unspoken words hung between them. "And you, Clara, are the reason for that caution." Clara realized then that her presence here was not just an inconvenience to Elias. It was a burden, a responsibility he hadn't asked for, but one he seemed determined to bear. The threat of Silas Blackwood, once a distant rumor, now felt chillingly close, and she understood that Elias Thorn, the taciturn rancher, was her only shield. The encounter with Jed, the drifter, cast a long shadow over the days that followed. Elias became even more watchful, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He spent more time out with the cattle, riding the perimeter of his land, his movements deliberate and guarded. Clara, too, felt a growing unease. The vast, open landscape that had once felt merely empty now seemed exposed, vulnerable. Every rustle of wind through the sparse brush, every distant hawk's cry, seemed to carry a hint of menace. One evening, as a storm gathered on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and angry grey, Elias sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle with a practiced, methodical grace. Clara, her hands busy with her mending, couldn't shake the feeling that their fragile peace was about to be shattered. "Elias," she began, her voice soft, "my father, he seemed to think this place would be safe, but you don't seem to agree." Elias paused, his gaze fixed on the rifle barrel. "Your father's a good lawman, Clara, but he's a long way from here. And Silas Blackwood, he ain't exactly known for respecting boundaries." He met her eyes, his own serious. "This ranch is isolated. That's good for keeping a low profile, but it also means there ain't much help if things go south." "You think he's coming here?" The question was barely a whisper. "Blackwood's unpredictable," Elias said, resuming his cleaning. "He's been known to strike where he's least expected, and the rumors, they're getting louder." He ran a thumb over the smooth wood of the rifle stock. "That's why your father sent you here. Thought I could keep you safe, out of sight." A flicker of resentment crossed Clara's face. "And you're stuck with me because of it." Elias finally looked at her, a hint of something softening in his eyes. "It's my responsibility, Clara. Your father asked me, and I aim to keep my word." He paused. "Besides," he added, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, "you're proving to be a tougher sort than I expected." Clara felt a warmth spread through her, a small ember of something. It wasn't quite trust, not yet, but it was a step away from the constant tension. "I'm learning," she said, her voice steadier now. The storm broke that night with a ferocity that rattled the cabin. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a banshee. Elias, despite his earlier assurances, seemed restless, pacing the small space between the fireplace and the door. Clara found herself watching him, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze kept drifting to the darkened windows. The next morning, the land was transformed. The dust had settled, replaced by a fresh, clean scent. But the air was heavy, charged with an unspoken foreboding. Elias, after a quick breakfast, announced he was heading out to check the fences on the far north pasture. "Be careful, Elias," Clara said, the words escaping before she could stop them. He met her gaze, and for a fleeting moment she saw not just a gruff rancher, but a man shouldering a heavy burden. "Always am," he replied. He didn't offer further explanation, and Clara didn't press. She understood that in this world, actions spoke louder than words, and Elias Thorne's actions, though often silent, were beginning to speak of a quiet, steadfast resolve. But the whispers of danger carried on the wind and in the hushed tones of passing strangers were a constant reminder that their quiet existence was precarious, and the storm, both meteorological and human, was far from over. Elias rode hard, his horse, a sturdy mare named Willow, eating up the miles. The north pasture was the most remote part of his land, bordering a rugged canyon that offered ample hiding places for rustlers, or worse, outlaws. The recent storm had washed away any tracks, making his vigilance even more crucial. He scanned the landscape, his eyes sharp, missing nothing. The usual signs of animal life were scarce, the silence unnerving. He reached the canyon's edge, the scent of damp earth and pine needles filling the air. He paused, listening. Nothing, just the distant cry of a hawk. He urged Willow down into the canyon, the going rougher here, the terrain treacherous. He was halfway through when he heard it, a faint click, the unmistakable sound of a cocked rifle. Before he could react, a shot rang out, splintering wood from a nearby rock face. Elias reacted instinctively, ducking low, pulling Willow to a halt. Another shot, closer this time, whizzed past his head. He was caught in a trap. "Well, well, Thorne," a voice drawled, laced with mockery. "Fancy meeting you here." Elias recognized the voice, Silas Blackwood. He hadn't expected the outlaw to be so bold, so close. He could see movement in the shadows of the canyon walls, dark figures emerging. There were at least 3 of them. "Didn't expect you to be so careless, Blackwood," Elias retorted, his hand gripping his rifle, which he'd fortunately brought with him. "Careless? I'm just getting started," Blackwood sneered, stepping into a patch of sunlight. He was a wiry man, his face a cruel mask, his eyes like chips of obsidian. "Heard you're harboring the sheriff's girl. Sheriff Sterling owes me a favor. I figure I'll collect it now by taking his precious daughter." Elias's blood ran cold. They knew Clara was here. His mind flashed to the cabin, to Clara, alone and vulnerable. He had to get back. "You ain't getting anywhere near her, Blackwood," Elias growled, raising his rifle. A hail of gunfire erupted. Elias, using Willow as cover, fired back, aiming for the figures he could see. He was outnumbered, outgunned. He needed to escape, to warn Clara. He spurred Willow, making a desperate dash for the canyon mouth. A searing pain ripped through his left arm. He grunted, his grip on the rifle faltering. He was hit, but he couldn't stop. Not now. He pushed Willow harder, the horse responding with a surge of speed. Gunshots continued to echo behind him, but they seemed to be falling away. He burst out of the canyon, his breath ragged, the pain in his arm a throbbing agony. He didn't look back. His only thought was of Clara. He had to get to her. He urged Willow into a gallop, the fate of the sheriff's daughter and perhaps his own, resting on his ability to outrun the darkness that was closing in. Elias rode like a man possessed, the pain in his arm a constant, searing reminder of his vulnerability. Blood stained his shirt, seeping through the fabric, but he paid it little mind. His sole focus was the cabin and Clara. He pushed Willow to her limits, the mare's sides heaving, her hooves a frantic drumbeat against the parched earth. He had to warn her, to get her to safety. He had failed to protect himself, but he would not fail her. As he neared the ranch, he saw it, a rider, silhouetted against the setting sun, approaching the cabin. His heart leapt into his throat. Was it Blackwood? Had they found her already? He urged Willow into a final, desperate sprint, his injured arm hanging uselessly. He shouted Clara's name, his voice hoarse. The figure on the horse turned, surprised by his sudden, wild approach. It wasn't Blackwood. It was Sheriff Brody Sterling, Clara's father. Elias reined in Willow, gasping for breath. Sterling rode towards him, his face a mask of concern, which quickly turned to alarm as he saw Elias's bloody arm. "Elias! What happened?" Sterling dismounted, rushing to Elias's side. "Clara, is she all right?" "Sheriff," Elias managed, his voice strained. "Blackwood, he knows she's here. He ambushed me in the canyon. He's coming for her." Sterling's face hardened, his eyes flashing with a fierce protectiveness. "Blackwood! Damn him! I knew this was a risk." He looked at Elias, then back towards the cabin, his mind clearly racing. "We need to get Clara out of here, now." "He might be close," Elias warned, his vision blurring slightly from the pain and blood loss. "We'll take my horse," Sterling said decisively. "It's fresh. You can ride with me. We'll head towards the next town, get help." But Elias shook his head, his gaze fixed on the cabin. "No, she's expecting me back. She'll be worried. I need to tell her myself." He gritted his teeth, fighting the pain. "She's alone. Blackwood's a wolf. He'll smell fear." Sterling hesitated, torn. He trusted Elias Thorne, despite their past differences. He knew the rancher was a man of his word, and that Clara's safety was paramount. "All right, Elias, but we move fast. And if Blackwood shows up before you can get her out, you fight. You fight like hell to buy her time." With that, Sterling mounted his horse, Elias gritting his teeth against the pain, clambering up behind him. They rode towards the cabin, a grim determination etched on their faces, the setting sun casting long, ominous shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe like the very danger they were racing against. Elias's arm throbbed, a constant, agonizing beat, but it was the thought of Clara's safety that fueled his resolve. He had to be there for her. As Elias and Sheriff Sterling approached the cabin, a sense of dread hung in the air. A single, unfamiliar horse was tied outside. Blackwood was already there. With pistols drawn, they kicked open the door. The cabin was silent, except for a low, menacing voice from the bedroom doorway. "Looking for someone, Sheriff?" Silas Blackwood stood with a cruel smirk. his arm wrapped tightly around a bound Clara. Her face was pale, but her eyes blazed with defiance. "Let her go, Blackwood," Sterling commanded, his voice dangerously calm. Blackwood laughed, tightening his grip. "Not yet. She's worth a good ransom." He shoved Clara forward, making her stumble. Elias stepped to catch her, his injured arm protesting the sudden movement. Blackwood raised his pistol, but in that split-second distraction, Clara acted. With a powerful twist, she broke free and kicked out, catching him off balance. The unexpected move made Blackwood's pistol fire wildly. Before the shot's echo faded, Elias, ignoring the searing pain in his arm, brought his rifle up. The crack of his shot was sharp and decisive. Blackwood cried out, clutching his shoulder as he stumbled backward. Sterling was on him instantly, disarming and cuffing him. The threat had passed, but the tension remained. Clara rushed to Elias, her hands hovering over his bandaged arm. "Elias, your arm!" He waved away her concern, his gaze fixed on the subdued outlaw. "He's not going anywhere." "No, he's not," Sterling confirmed, a newfound respect in his eyes as he looked at Elias. "You fought well, Thorn." As Sterling led the bound Blackwood away, a different kind of quiet settled over the cabin. It was a quiet of exhaustion and immense relief. Clara, her own fear finally receding, gently touched Elias's arm. "You should have let me get you out of here," Elias murmured, his voice rough. "And leave you alone to face him?" Clara's voice was firm. "No, Elias, I couldn't." Her gaze held a depth of emotion she had never shown before. "You're not just some rancher from an advertisement. You're brave." Elias, a man of few words, could only meet her eyes, a flicker of wonder in his own. The immediate danger was gone, but a new, more profound connection was just beginning. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of quiet recovery. Clara, choosing to stay at the ranch, tended to Elias's wound with a surprising gentleness. The gruff silence that once defined their interactions softened, replaced by comfortable companionship. Elias found himself more open, and Clara found herself thriving amidst the rugged beauty of ranch life. She no longer saw a harsh world, but a place she was beginning to call home. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat by the fire, a shared peace between them. "When I put that advertisement out," Elias said, his voice a low rumble, "I wasn't expecting this." Clara smiled, her gaze soft. "And I wasn't expecting to be hiding from an outlaw. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" "It does," Elias agreed, his eyes meeting hers. "You stole my peace, you know." Clara laughed, a bright, clear sound. "And you stole mine, Elias Thorn. But perhaps," she added, her gaze softening, "that wasn't such a bad thing." In the solitude of Redemption Creek, a different kind of peace had bloomed. It was a peace born not of loneliness, but of partnership. The rancher had wanted a common bride, but he had found something far more precious, a woman who had not just stolen his peace, but helped him rebuild it, stronger and more beautiful than before.